Pip, thank you for joining us
That's
today.
all right.
Really excited to talk to you today about your experiences with anxiety and how that's kind of shaped your life, the journey it's taken you on in your life, and where you find yourself now, and the way you've used your experiences to help others. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Excited.
Do you want to start off by just telling us a bit about yourself and your journey with anxiety?
Yeah, sure. So anxiety has always been a really big part of my life. It shaped many years and kind of, has played a big role in who I am now today. So it's cool to be able to get to talk about it. But my first experience with like a proper anxiety attack happened when I was in grade 3. And it happened like in a class, and kind of all of a sudden I didn't really know what was going on. I just could feel my body reacting and I was getting all worked up. And it was triggered by a kid in my class running outside and being sick. And then as a result of that, I then discovered that I have quite a severe phobia of vomit.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I didn't realize to the extent that I had it until that kind of like triggered that. And so then after that, it kind of was like, I guess, a catapult into what was going to be a few really hard years of me battling with anxiety. So I would, in grade 3, I think while I was still young, I was still learning about all these emotions, didn't really know what was going on. I would find any time that I would have like a sore stomach or the slightest feeling of feeling sick, my instant response would just be like a panic attack.
Yeah, wow.
Tears, very overwhelmed, just a lot going on. And they would most of the time sometimes be at school, especially at the start. So then the teachers wouldn't know what to do. So then they'd take me up to sick bay and then calling mum in hysterics like, Mum, I need to go home, come pick me up. Because, it's like in such a state of panic. And so then that was like quite hard for mum as well, because then she was never sure, like, do I actually need to leave
Are
my
you
work?
actually sick?
Like what's going on?
Yep. That must have been pretty terrifying as a kid that age.
Yeah.
To all of a sudden your body's doing something that you don't know.
For sure.
What is going on to me?
And I had no idea the extent. And in my world, it was like so real. And like, this is such a struggle for me. And I was like so petrified of this vomit. And then also like, it's not very irrational fear. So then you're like battling with that as well. But that kind of stuff comes into it a little bit later on. I ended up, my parents getting play therapy for me, which was really great. So I don't remember how many sessions that I did, and I don't even really remember what I talked about. All I remembered is that I went into a room and I got to play. Yeah, and it clearly helped. They were clearly doing stuff with me that was really good. So that was kind of happened at the start, and it kind of helped me get out of that first rut. Other aspects that also helped me get out of that was I'd like talk to my grandma a lot, and she had a very strong faith. So then she brought in that kind of like spiritual side of it, and taught me about the armor of God.
Yeah. Cool.
So then I would notice like when I would like have an anxiety attack or like wake up in the night feeling anxious, I'd like get out of bed and pretend to put on the armor of God and like actively like try to fight it off, because I didn't want to have to go get my mum every single time, because at the start that was my initial response, just run into mum's room like, Mum, I've got the wobbles. So yeah, probably
such a good description of it actually.
I got the wobbles, my whole body was shaking. And then so probably from grade 3 to grade 6 it was kind of that cycle where I'd have like periods where the anxiety would get worse, and wake up in the middle of the night and be having an anxiety attack and then having to deal with that. And then obviously that put a lot of strain on, like mum and dad as well, because it's quite stressful and lots of different things. And so then as I was getting a little bit older, the things that would come up would be like school camps. So I would never want to go on school camps because I'd be so worried that someone on the bus was going to get bus sick, or I was going to get sick where I was there. And just a very real fear that was like, couldn't get it out of my mind. So mum would end up coming on the school camps with me. And then in grade 6, they wanted me to go on school camp without mum, and I didn't want to go on school camp without mum. So I got counselling at school to kind of work me towards getting to that stage of going on camp without mum. Which I did end up going. So those are the kind of the first few years where I remember it being really kind of like suffocating. I remember struggling with things like, God, like, why have you given this to me? Like, I don't understand. And I think obviously because I was developing and I was growing and learning in my emotions as well. So it's kind of hard to control them at that stage when they're so full on, because you don't really know what's going on. I think it just really took away my self-confidence, because I was like, I'm someone with anxiety. Like, that's who I am. Like, I can't stop this, even though that I knew that like the fear wasn't really that real or that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really noticed that it had a big impact on my identity and also who like I thought I was and the value that I thought that I had.
I think when we're talking before, you were saying that you used to introduce yourself as, "Hey, I'm Pip and I have anxiety."
Yeah.
Like it was that ingrained in your
It
identity.
was, and it was something that I wanted people to know, but then I didn't want them to know because I was embarrassed about it. But I wanted them to know to be like a bit more kinder.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, especially when I was going into high school, because I was worried again, because I was like, all the primary teachers kind of knew what was going on, but in high school that they didn't know.
Starting from scratch again.
Yeah. So then it was kind of like a conversation that I'd want like mum to have with them. So it was very much, it just became ingrained in me to live a life of fear. So whether it was, about vomit, it then was like, like going into school, like I was nervous about all of that, like just what ifs, like constantly. Yeah. So I wasn't always having, like the panic attacks, but I noticed, and I can reflect on that now, that I was living, like held back by fear.
Yeah.
That I think had kind of been ingrained in me from having such strong emotional reactions and stuff. So yeah, as I went into high school, the anxiety and the panic attacks themselves lessened. Still very much had that fear of vomit, but it probably wasn't as an extreme response, because also as you're getting older, it's kind of not in
Start to control your emotions a
your
little bit more.
and also like the vomiting and stuff, it's not in your face as much because people aren't getting as sick. So it was like kind of like a big wrestling thing, something that I still was like, okay, I still have this, and there's different circumstances that came up. So like I went on a mission trip to Vanuatu in year 10, and that was a really big thing for me because like going overseas, worried about getting sick, and I actually did end up getting sick over there. And thankfully for me, I was one of the first ones to get sick, which kind of helped because then I wasn't in my head about what if it happens, because it had already happened. But it was also kind of like a good step. It's like, okay, Pip, like you can deal with this. Like if it happens, it's actually the fear that is almost worse than the actual thing.
Getting sick, vomiting is not actually the end of the world.
The fear
the build
makes
up to it is
just so strong. So yeah, then that was kind of year 10. And then year 11, I started doing food tech.
Okay.
And this is kind of where things started to change a little bit for me again, because in food tech we learned all about these high-risk foods.
Yeah, okay, wow.
Which for someone that is like, obviously triggered by that kind of stuff, it's probably not the best thing to learn.
Hey, this food will make you sick if you don't cook it properly.
Yeah, exactly. So then obviously I became like almost like so focused on this kind of like fixated, like I wouldn't want to eat chicken, I wouldn't eat rice, I wouldn't want to eat pasta, and because the high risk foods are like chicken and rice, stuff that I hadn't learned. Like I already knew about the chicken, but the rice and the pasta and stuff. So, and I think the reason that it impacted me as much is because I think I was also like going through a few stresses in life at that stage. Like starting to do VCE and all that kind of stuff.
It's not exactly an easy time of
life. So I think I wasn't able to take the information in a healthy way. So it really started to impact me, and to the extent, where I was like super fussy about what I would eat. It really was hard for mum and dad, because I'd be like, have you washed your hands after touching the chicken? Is it cooked? How long have you had it out? We need to put the food back in the fridge, like just anal them all the time. And then I like was hating myself because I didn't want to do it. But then if I didn't do it, I was like so fearful that like, if I don't say something, like what if we get sick? And like the reality is like mum's never made us sick from her cooking in her whole life. But what if it was the first time?
What if that is the one time?
That I don't say, how old. And so it's just like, so irrational. And I knew that. And that's kind of was the hard part when I was in year 11, just because I knew this is not okay. Like I know that I'm not thinking rationally. So then it kind of then turned into like, I wasn't having so much anxiety attacks. I was like fixated on the fear of eating this food, but then it kind of turned into more depression because I felt so weighted down by it. And I was like, you know what, I've struggled with this, my whole life. Like I thought that I'd kind of worked through this, I'm over it. And then seeing in a way like impact like my parents, because I knew that they were like, oh no, like is this happening again? And they've always supported me so much through it, but you still see like the emotional toll like it's taking on them. And I just remember like standing in my room one night thinking like, oh, like this is too much. I am such a burden. Like I need to get over this, but I just can't. So I was in like a low mood for a little while that people like started to notice, like teachers and stuff started to notice like, Pip, there's something going on. You just don't seem yourself. Cause I'm normally like a happy, upbeat person. Like that's how I present. So that was kind of like, sad for me because it was a time where I felt like even more burdened by it because I just couldn't fight the emotions, even though that I knew I wasn't being rational and I knew that I should just eat these things. It would just like, really take up my mind. So I ended up getting counselling again. I think, seeing a psychologist during that time.
Yeah.
And I think that was super helpful because I was a bit older, so they could do more of that targeted like exposure kind of therapy with me. Okay. Like they kind of broke it down like a scale of like, okay, what is your worst fear in the world? And at that time, if you sat me in the room, my worst fear would have been like me vomiting. Yeah, and it's like, and then so they say to you like, okay, is that worse than your parents dying? And like the reaction in my body is like, yes, it is. Yeah. But then seeing it in front of you, it's like, oh my goodness, like I'm being so silly. That was kind of really helped me, I guess, move on from that. I think it was kind of like a stint. But since then, the anxiety hasn't been like as strong. It has been a journey, to get over it. But I think the first time in my life where I would say that I'm not someone that has anxiety was probably last year. Oh, wow. Okay. And I think that, coincided with me like studying the counselling and stuff and learning to understand it more, and also going on my own journey of self-love, of like letting that go, like just because that's who I was back then. It's not a label that I have to carry around, and there's the, freedom from that. And I think obviously, my faith journey as well plays into that. But in terms of like anxiety now, like, and the fear of vomit, I'm still a little bit fearful of it. Yep. I don't think it's ever going to be my favourite thing. Yeah. I'll still be like intentional about washing my hands and, preparation of food and stuff. But it's at a level now where I feel like it's okay, like it's healthy. It's kind of normal. We should kind of have normal hygiene and stuff anyway. And I feel like I'm able to be, a lot more rational and calm about it if something does happen. That's kind of the anxiety journey summed up.
Yeah. So that's, that's a fair chunk of your life.
It is, yeah.
Especially starting so young and, kind of continuing to, really last year is the first time you're saying you're not actively saying I am someone with anxiety all the time. Yeah. And it's interesting because you've kind of grown through it as well too, from just a young kid going, what is happening to me, to starting to understand that a bit more and understand what's going on in your body and things like that. Do you think as you've gotten older, gotten more emotionally mature and things like that, you can start to see a bit more that this is an irrational fear as opposed to this is everything that's consuming my mind?
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think it's kind of so funny because when you look back on the things that they try to teach you, you could just breathe, just relax, talk about it at the time. You're like, this is not really helping. But now when I look back, I can see that, okay, I'm actually quite regulated, if you will, in my emotions, especially considering how emotionally reactive I used to be, to able to be like, okay, these things, they do work and they have benefited me. And so then when these thoughts do come and I am feeling anxious, I can be like, okay, I'm feeling anxious and these are some of the things why. I think obviously the training and counselling has played into that a lot, but in terms of just being self-aware of just even how it impacted me, my thinking patterns, all that kind of stuff, has been something that I've just probably started to notice more the last few years when I've started to look on how it impacted my identity formation and how I viewed myself. But definitely the older you get, you just naturally grow in your emotional intelligence and regulation, which helps heaps. So,
I guess going along that same kind of journey as you're emotionally learning how to deal with it, you were talking about faith at a very young age as well. So how, when did your faith start and how did that kind of progress along with having to deal with anxiety?
Yeah. So I think I remember, so as I mentioned, my grandma teaching me about the armor of God. Yeah. So I think that was the first time I started to understand God as a protector and God as someone that can fight for me and give me that peace and calmness, while also still wrestling with at the time, okay, God, why did you allow this to happen? Because I was a bit younger. I didn't obviously have a full picture of God's heart and who he is. But I feel that those nights where I would get up and I'd put on my armor and I'd like recite Bible verses or like sing songs, I feel like it kind of really solidified my need for God, and because I felt like his peace and presence in those times, beyond what I had ever experienced before. So I felt like that was like, okay, I can't do this without God. So that was, in grade 3 up to grade 6. And then I officially gave my life to him when I was in grade 5. So nice. I guess separated my faith from my parents' faith. And then throughout, maturing in high school and stuff, I've always believed in him, always prayed and stuff. But I think, kind of grappled with, why God, why did you allow this? And the suffering and, I think it was probably put on a back burner thinking about his role into it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, in terms of my faith maturing, in 2020 in lockdown when we had heaps of time, I was really hungry for God then, because I'd reached at a stage in my life where I was had kind of been, doing the ways of the world. And I was like, this is not really fulfilling me. I want to be a part of a church. I want to be a part of a community, and I want to be solid in my faith and understand God more. So I spent heaps of time in his word and reading and listening to podcasts, and just growing so much. And then that's what led me to enroll in Bible college, a certificate.
Wow. Okay.
I just did a graduate certificate because I was I've got this time, I need to use it well, and I really want to learn God more. And during that time, I think I just grew so much in understanding who God is and what his heart is for me, and how he is with us in the suffering and can still use that. So I think it was so much oh God, I thank you that I never had to do it without you. And then in terms of understanding the emotional side of it, that also came into I read heaps of books about anxiety and worry and what God says on that kind of stuff, and how he really calls us to not fear. And kind of, as I mentioned, how that was the focus of my mind. And I really realized this even the last few years, that I'd be thinking about the future, I'd be thinking about things, and it would just be a focus of my mind. And my constant thing was living in fear and what if this doesn't happen? And it wasn't even necessarily to do with, it wasn't even with vomit, it was just life stuff.
Yep.
And that's what I realized in my faith. I was I really need to set these fears aside, and I need to give them to God, because that's what he tells me to not fear. And sitting in this is kind of a sin, because that's what he calls us not to do. And not that he's mad at me for doing it, but it's okay, I need to give this to God and let go of that control. And that also comes into letting go of having my emotions and okay, God, I'm feeling this, I don't necessarily know why I'm feeling this right now, but I'm feeling this and I invite you into this space. So I think it's kind of been learning to understand that, and also learning to understand and the healing kind of comes when we give up. And I say, God, I can't do this. I can't carry this alone, because he never wanted me to. And that kind of just helps the anxiety and fear go away anyway, because you're okay, God, you are in control. And that kind of is that pattern of where I guess it's rewiring your brain and fixing your eyes on Jesus. In that passage in Hebrews, which is one of my favorites, it's when you fix your eyes on Jesus, you can run the race, because you're reminded of his love for you and his promises and his care. And it's you don't actually want me to have it all figured out. You just want me to come to you and just be at peace with that. So I think for me that the faith journey has kind of shifted in understanding that whilst we say, God, be with me in this place, it's more understanding who God is and who his heart and what his heart is that brings you the peace. Because it's okay, I know that no matter what tomorrow brings or, what's to come, you are you're for me and you have good for me, and then I can just be at peace and I can be still with you. So I think over the last few years it's been maturing in that and understanding that why God calls us to rest and why God calls us to be still is because we can't keep going at a pace that the world wants us to. We can't have it all figured out, because all of that builds anxiety and stress, and so much of us are just living in that state of heightened whereas And coming out of lockdown, what's it going to look like? What's my work going to be like? Just what if? And that's kind of just what the world feeds you. And so, and it's hard to fight that, because it is battling with that. Yeah. battling with the culture versus battling with like what God says. So I think how I look at it now is like even if times like if I know that I'm still going to go ahead and there will be times where I'm still going to feel anxious because that's just it's an emotion and we're going to feel it. But it's like, okay, just because I feel this doesn't mean that I am this. And I don't have to feel the heaviness of it that I used to feel and just like give it to God. You know, God, I'm feeling anxious, but I know that, you know, you told me like to trust in you and I know that I can do that. And then I have kind of seen that in the story of, how I am now. But that kind of answers the question.
No, that's awesome. So obviously that's a pretty amazing place to get to where, you know, you've learnt that you have to surrender to God and that He's with you in that. And then that is how healing has come and that is how you've found peace to deal with that.
Yep.
But was it always like that? So I'm thinking especially like those kind of year 11, year 12 years kind of thing when you got the stress of VCE, your anxiety's flaring up again, doing food tech and really focusing on food and stuff like that. You said that, you know, kind of your faith or your understanding of how God worked in that took a little bit of a back seat. What was that like during that time? Did you kind of start questioning or just not inviting Him into dealing with it?
I think it was more not inviting him in or like inviting him into the sense of like, I don't know, like I'd pray about it but not fully surrender.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And I think that was like, you know, I felt like I needed to still do all the things that I used to do, which I know that like there was power in that because there's like, you know, fighting off the thoughts of the enemy and the worry and stuff. But I think it was just not, I just didn't really understand why God says like He can bring us our peace, you know. So you pray like, God, give me a peace, and then like if you're not feeling it, like okay, well, He mustn't be answering this in the way that I'm expecting and all that kind of stuff. And I think also I think it just wasn't. I don't think it was as big as a focus for me at that time because I was focused on schoolwork, I was focusing on the anxiety. I had like a boyfriend at the time, all this friendship stuff. So I just think my faith was kind of one of those things. It's like it's there. I still believe in God and I know He promises to be at peace and be present. But I think it's like, didn't understand that how you actually get that peace is by, you know, like completely surrendering.
And that surrender is a really interesting thing because I mean, I found the same thing in my own life that, you know, especially when you've grown up with faith kind of thing, you go, well, I still need to be praying about this. I still need to be reading the word. I still need to be asking people to pray for me. But there's a difference between praying about it and actually completely giving it over and surrendering.
Yeah.
Because one is almost like, hey, God, I'm letting you know that this is what's going on, but I'm still trying to hold on to it myself.
Yeah.
And He asks us to actually cast our burdens on Him, not to just let Him know about our burdens. He knows that already. Yeah. But He wants to see us actually letting go. And it's amazing that you found that experience that in letting go, that's when He began to work. And that's when you actually started to find some peace in it.
And it's something like it's still a journey, you know. It's something that I noticed, like I had an experience on Monday where something came into my mind that like I didn't realize that I was holding on so tightly to. And then I was like, okay, God, like I know that I'm holding on to this because I feel like I've got a lack of control. But I've just got to let it go and I've got to give it to you and, you know, invite Him into that space. And, you know, that applies to so many things. And I think it's just been really helpful in being able to live in a place that is not controlled by fear. A place that is actually of peace because I know that it is every day I have to resurrender different things and let go of control, but it kind of helps with that rewiring of the brain and keeping my eyes fixed on God. So you can just do that daily building of peace.
So one of the things that people that when they're often going to counselling for the first time or seeing a psychologist for the first time is they might come up against CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, and that's kind of that whole rewiring your brain and rewiring the way you think about your anxious thoughts or the thoughts that are dominating your mind and that kind of thing. But it's interesting how you're using that same kind of terminology with rewiring your brain to become more dependent on God. What did that process kind of look like for you?
I think the thing with rewiring is you don't realize it's happened until it's happened.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about like, you know, doing these therapy things or even like some biblical things and like because building habits is hard and making changes is hard because you want the instant changes. And it doesn't happen like that. So it's kind of like okay, God, I believe these truths, and I know, I've seen them in circumstances in my life and other people's lives that, you promise to do these things. So even when I don't feel like it, even when I feel like I want to sit in this fear and I want to sit in the anxiety, even though it makes me feel worse because I'm like holding on to it, I'm like, I'm going to give it to you. And so I think for me, it's really a day by day thing, because sometimes like I don't realize I might be holding on to something for a little while and then actually be like, okay, no, the reason that I've been feeling like this or feeling so, like dull for even weeks and months sometimes on end is because I'm holding on to something that I need to give to God. And it is that like those slow changes kind of then turn into big changes because they help you like build those habits and like be obedient and make those changes. And it's just one of those things. It's like we always want things instantly. Like I want to be able to get on a bike and be able to ride the bike straight away. I don't want to have to go through that slow process. But it is in that slow process that it kind of solidifies and it becomes stronger, and that like it becomes like how you live your life, because instantly like then it's not a part of us. Whereas if it's slow, like it's built in and it becomes who we are. And so I think it's like that action of like that daily like submitting to God, that daily like I've got to give over control to you, and like just as soon as I notice that I'm holding on to things, be like, okay, God, I'm giving them to you. I invite you into this.
And like you say, the rewiring, you don't realize that it's happening or happened until one day you go, hang on, I have been giving this over to God every single day. I haven't been holding on to this. This has now become my default way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
And that's huge because you're just like, wow, okay.
Yeah. And it's only something that I'm really starting to realize now in terms of the not living in fear, because as I said, that was something that like for years of my life, probably still most of my life, I lived like that. And it's not really been until the last year or so that I really started to be like, I'm actually not living in fear anymore. Like I'm not that worried about the future. I'm just staying in the present, and that's where God wants us to be. So it's good.
So obviously you were saying, the anxiety has never completely gone away. So how does it look like dealing with it today?
Today, yeah. Well, I think last time that I had probably more of like a panic attack. I think it was a few months ago, and I was a little bit shocked by it because,
hang on, I've dealt with this.
I've dealt with this.
Yeah.
Don't have this anymore. But I think I was like, okay, the body response, and I think what actually happened during that time is it wasn't so much the anxiety itself; it was the feeling that and all of the emotional waves that came back with that. Because it's like when I had that attack or got a little bit anxious and my body, was like shaking and all that kind of stuff. I was like, it kind of reminded me of like who I used to be. And I was like, no, like I don't want to be like this anymore. And so I think it's like terms of like, I know that it's still going to happen. And I know the reality is like, if I get confronted with someone, for example, if I hang out with someone all day and then I found out they have had gastro, like I'm probably going to be anxious about that. But I know that it's like I've got to sit in it. Like I can't push it aside because that doesn't work. Like I know that I'm still going to be scared and I'm still going to be fearful about it, and I've just got to write it out. So it's kind of like building the structure and the things to help yourself during that time, because I'm still gonna get anxious. And I know, like, and I can pray and I can give it to God, and I might still feel anxious about those things, but it's just like, kind of sitting in it, accepting it, that it's could still be there, and like journeying through that to get out of it. And even though in the time it's super hard because you're so like heightened and like stressed and you're not thinking rationally, but I know like you get through it because I've gotten through every single one that I've ever had.
That ability to look back and go, hang on, every time this has happened, I have actually been okay.
So I think it's knowing that, and also trying to put the things in life to protect it from happening to an extent, So I really am trying to be like quite self-conscious of having my own like self-care and spending time, like journaling and talking and processing my emotions in general, to kind of prevent myself from getting to a stage where I'm constantly like stressed and
built up so much
and pushed over. So, when something happens, like if someone says they're not feeling well, I would have used to react straight away. Whereas now, because I'm kind of in a state of like constant regulation, I'm like able to respond to that in a more balanced way rather than being anxious all the time.
And that trigger, when you haven't been able to stay regulated, that trigger, yes, it's something that induces the anxiety, But what comes flowing over the top is actually all of that stress, all of the things you've been holding in for all that time, not just the anxiety of the immediate situation.
And everything is just like so much worse because it's like, So it's kind of like building habits, making choices, because I can see like, okay, this actually helps me. I stay more at peace and relaxed and not as anxious. So kind of try to keep doing those things.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's interesting then. So you've been a kid who's had anxiety and you've gone all the way through school. So you've obviously dealt with, play therapists, school counselors, psychologists, things like that. You're now actually studying, and are you finished studying or almost finished studying?
Yeah, almost.
To be
so
a
close.
counsellor.
Yeah.
So tell us about that journey about, from having been a student and dealing with anxiety to now actually studying counselling and wanting to help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember kind of when I had my first anxiety attack, or during that time, I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, I want to be a counsellor because I want to be able to help kids like me. And I've just always had that.
Providing that help that you didn't have in that time?
Well, I did have a support. I just think because it impacted me so much. And I was like, if I could help one person like not have this, then that would be worth it. Even though like, I wouldn't have been able to not have it because they didn't know it was a thing. But still, that was what my heart's cry was. That's what I wanted to do. And so that kind of took a back burner as I got older. And then I didn't even really think about it so much in high school. I kind of thought like maybe I could do it, but like in year 11 and 12 when I was starting to think about what I wanted to do once I finished. But everyone was always like, oh, it's so hard. Like you won't be able to do it. Wow. You won't be able to carry people's emotions and all that kind of stuff. And so I believed that. And I think sometimes, and I thought this about myself, it's like when you have anxiety or when you have, some of these kind of intense emotions, you're like considered weak. And so a lot of people in my life, a lot of the older people, like some of my grandparents and stuff, kind of just put a weak label on me. And because they are people in my life that say that, you kind of believe it. So I was like, okay, maybe it's not for me. Maybe I'm not going to be able to do it. So I didn't pursue that. I actually pursued a career in hotel management.
Okay. Nice.
Which I loved. I loved elements of it because I've always wanted to travel overseas, and I was like, amazing, like I can do it. But it didn't fulfill me. And during the time that I was studying this, I wasn't that close with God during this time either. Graduated high school, went to uni, all that kind of stuff. I definitely still had my faith, but I wasn't doing day-to-day like relationship with him. And so then 2020 came, the COVID lockdown came. I was
not great for the hotel industry.
Not great for the hotel industry. I was working at the hotel on the March weekend that was meant to be Grand Prix.
Oh, wow.
We were fully booked. We had like the Mercedes team were coming to stay with us, and like it was going to be a really busy weekend. And then like with someone getting sick in one of the other teams, like
they shut the Melbourne Grand Prix.
They shut it. And so everyone left the hotel. So we went from having like 100% occupancy to having like 10%.
Wow.
And then ended up having the weekend off. And so I was like, win. But I really started to notice, I was like, oh, I was actually happy about having the time off. Like I was happy because then after that, the hotel stood down a few people. And during that time I was like, I don't really want to go back. Yeah. Like I wasn't finding fulfillment in it. I was struggling with the shift work and the hours and stuff. And so that was the time that I really was like, okay, I've got all this free time. If I'm not going to read my Bible now, it's never going to happen. So let's get into the word.
Wow.
And I did, and I really started to see myself growing in it. Just hunger to know God, and that then led me to like, okay, I feel like he's calling me to, leading me to do more study and do a Bible college, and that's all initially I thought that I was going to do. I thought I was just going to do 6 months, just a bit of extra study. It'd be great to have this extra knowledge because I
fill in all your free time that you've now got.
Fill in this free time. What else is there to do? And I found that I wanted to, like, I understood the stories of the Bible and I knew them, but I didn't understand like their bigger meaning and their bigger picture. And I didn't feel that I could talk about them in a way that like some of these other people in my life were doing. So that was like, okay, I want to understand God's big picture. I want to understand God's heart, so then I can go and I can talk about it as well. So that's kind of what led me to doing Bible college. And then when I found like God was just kind of like in the back of my mind working in me like, you need to do counseling. Like you need to do it. And because it was something that the uni had offered. And yeah, I didn't even know, couldn't even pinpoint when I first started thinking about it. But I just really started to feel like a wrestling in my spirit because I knew that this was going to be a big decision.
Yep.
Because at this stage, like I was still employed at the hotel. I was working 1 or 2 shifts there, like just doing security and stuff. And so I knew that for me to study counselling, I was going to have to give up this thing that I'd studied like 3 years for. I thought that's what I was doing for my future. Had a pretty big HECS debt as a result of it. And also that's kind of just like what everyone expected of me.
Yep.
So I was really wrestling with like, okay, like, is this something that I can do? Is this something that I should do? Like, because the world probably would tell me to just keep pursuing that career because that's what I've studied and there's a cost and I've got to put a few years. But I knew that.
Got to make that investment.
Yeah, exactly. But I just knew that I was like, I can't keep doing it. And so then there was an element of like, I'm weak. Like I should be able to do this. So I was kind of wrestling with these kind of stuff. But then I was like, you know what? No, I know that I want to do counselling. And so then I had like kind of had to have the conversation with my parents, like this is what I want to do. And then there was like added stress of that as well because they're like, but your HECS debt is going to be even bigger and all that kind of stuff.
How did they take that conversation?
Let's just say they were okay. Like they were supportive of me. I just felt a pressure because it's like is a monetary thing. And also like I was like, should I listen to them in terms of like, I don't know the impact that could have on me in the future of having a HECS debt. But we talked about it and we're like, it's fine. I was like, you know what? It's actually not worth it for me not to do it because life is not about like just hustling and getting through life. It's about, thriving. And I felt that that's what, this counselling thing was going to do for me. So I made the decision and I enrolled. I think it was like I started classes in the November of 2020. Yep. And so I had to like tell the hotel that I wasn't going back. And I did like 2 subjects over summer and then they were great, but they were a bit hard because they were all online. So it wasn't like really like learning. And then, in the first semester last year, as soon as I started studying it properly full time, I loved it. Yeah. And I was like, felt so naturally gifted in some of the stuff, like the self-reflection and being able to talk. Because I've always been someone that's like happy to be open, honest and vulnerable. And you kind of have to be like that as a counsellor because you need to know where you're at to be able to like sit with people where they are. And I was like, I didn't really find the assignments to be that hard because I just so enjoyed studying all this kind of stuff.
Yep.
And so for me, it was like as soon as I started doing it, I just knew, I was like, God, this is what you had like always planned. And I remember having like a reflective moment at the start of this year. I was watching a movie, Dear Evan Hansen, and it's a movie that's got like social anxiety and stuff. And when I was sitting in that movie watching this guy, I was like getting emotional because I was like, oh, I feel so sad for him. Like I want to be able to help him. And then I realized, I was like, you know what? That's probably kind of like what God is like looking down on us when we're struggling with all these big emotions because like we don't have to live like that. And then I was like, and I feel like that was kind of like a glimpse of what God looks down on us, but then also what I can be like for people. And I just felt like if I had never had that anxiety that I struggled with, when I was looking back and wondering like, why God did you give this to me? And it's not, it's not that God gave it to me. It's just that now he's written so much beauty out of like the struggling in my life because if I hadn't struggled with that anxiety, I wouldn't be able to have the empathy and understanding that I can have now to be able to be a counsellor. And I'm at the stage now where I'm doing placement. So I'm at my final stage. I don't have any content left to learn. And I just feel like it is kind of coming so naturally to me. And I'm having like people telling me like, wow, you're helping me so much. And like sitting in there and watching them like start to change how they believe about themselves, like the emotions that they're carrying. And I had one of them say to me like, you're so like, I'm really getting so much out of these sessions. I'm just finding it so encouraging. And I was like, okay, this is it, Yeah. So I think I just bring so much glory to God because, they were some of the hardest nights and years of my life and they impacted me in so many ways, my identity, my friendships, all that kind of stuff. But I just feel like him being like, okay, I see that and I know it was really hard, but don't worry, there's still going to be beauty out of the ashes.
Yep.
And I just feel like now when I'm counseling, I'm like, this, it's so much more than a career for me. I'm like, this is what God, I think, has always been like part of the sculpting in who I am meant to be. And even though there will be like days where it's hard, it's like so much more than just a job. So that's kind of like a little bit of the journey of how I got there. And now, being able to look back and be like thankful kind of the experiences, even though they were really hard, because they've made me who I am now to then therefore hopefully be a better counsellor and carer for people.
Yeah. So do you find now that because you're someone that's lived that experience, that you're able to bring that into your counselling as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're working with people, there's a big element of like, you obviously don't want to overshare because you don't want to make it all about you. But I think I find myself, because I'm working with younger people at the moment, it's kind of helpful for them to share a bit of their own experiences, so they're the ones that are not feeling like so alone in it, and also just kind of like help them feel more seen. So I don't always share like, I used to struggle with anxiety or this kind of stuff, but I had someone sharing with me how they felt like a burden to their parents, and I was like, I understand, like, because I felt that, and whether I let that on or not, it kind of then just helps me change what I'm going to say next, because I kind of have experienced that more. And so I think there's an element of like, you kind of know what they need in that time, because I kind of know what I needed during that time to then be able to kind of have that for them. So
You're saying that when you were first deciding to start studying counselling, that a lot of people were saying, how are you going to carry other people's burdens, this kind of theme about weakness. So how do you actually find that playing out?
So that has been the whole time that I've started, like the whole time I've been studying it. That's what people say. And I just kind of say like, well, it's not for everyone. You know, I couldn't be a nurse, but God brings us with all these different gifts that we can all do different jobs. And I kind of just say to them like, I actually found it more consuming and more of a burden working in a job that I didn't love, and a job that was actually like sapping me and like, taking away from me. And that's probably what the culture would have told me to stay in.
Exactly, yeah.
But doing a work and like, being obedient to what God I felt like was leading me to has now given me like life, and like I feel like that I'm thriving in it, and I doesn't really feel like work. Like I just like love it so much. So I think in terms of when people say like, oh, how do you go? Look, not everyone can do it.
Yeah.
That's the reality. It is hard, and you do sit in there and you hear like really devastating stories. But I think in terms of me being weak, I've actually never been the kind of person to be overly impacted when someone shares a really sad story with me. Like I'm not being one that goes home and like carries it, which is good, because you can't be like that as a counsellor.
You'd burn out so quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of just say to them like, okay, like I understand how you might find it hard, but like when we've got different strengths, and I actually really enjoy it. And if the time comes where I'm in a season of my life where like, okay, I'm struggling to carry all this for a little while, then I'm so okay with being like, okay, we might just close the door on that for a little while and I'll do something else. Or because it's such a big, the skills you learn and the knowledge you have is so transferable. I could go more into, doing like well-being, different stuff, like don't have to be in the room. So I think it's more like people are going to have expectations on you. And they're going to be as a result of their upbringing and their own experiences. And you have to like, I'm so solidified in who I am, who I know like God has made me to be and what he wants me to do, that it kind of like, sure, it might be like, oh, that's not great, but I'm just going to keep on like pushing on because of that. Because if you listen to other people's expectations, then you kind of miss out on what you're meant to be.
Yeah, that's cool. So this thing about weakness and this perception of people that deal with anxiety as weak, because it looks from the outside like you're not able to cope and carry things. One of the things I found through interviews, through, learning about how things affect my wife has an anxiety disorder, is that while it sometimes looks like from the outside that, okay, well, you can't cope with that, so you're weaker than I am, it's actually most of the time, I reckon it's the other way around. So if you have been dealing, all your life or for a period of your life with these constant thoughts in your head that are that you're having to fight against and battle against and intentionally retrain your thinking and still able to function as a person, then actually you've been dealing with a whole lot more than, normal people, as much as I hate that word is. Have been, because they're just like, okay, well, my brain works the way it does. And for a lot of people, that means it's, there is anxiety, but it's just that kind of normal life anxiety that we all experience kind of thing, not something that takes over your whole body and takes over everything. And so I find it really interesting that, people have this perception of weakness of people with anxiety. And, in my own experience, it's only when I've started to learn to be, introspective and start evaluating my own emotions, starting to learn and process my own thinking. I've spent time in counselling. I've spent time with a psychologist as well, just dealing with my own stuff and dealing with how to help my wife. Is that go, wow, okay, there is so much going on the whole time that, the fact that you come out the other side of that is a pretty huge thing all by itself. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the amazing thing about having gone through that experience and having been able to survive that to some, I don't know if there's a better way to put it, but essentially to have come out the other side, your faith is intact. You're kind of in one of the best spaces of your life by the sounds of it, where you're actually enjoying life and you're thriving and you're taking joy and fulfillment from the work that you're doing. So how does that kind of thing, does that allow you to help give hope to those that are in the midst of it?
Yeah, I think my story in general, like when I share about with people, because people that I have met in the past few years, like for me to tell them, actually, this is who I was. Yeah. They're like shocked by it. Yeah. It's not something that they appear in. Like some of my really close friends now have only been like in the past few years, because like when I like stepped into this church now, like kind of sharing that story with them is like pretty amazing, and I get so much joy out of it because I'm like, but look what God did, and it's like, yes, such a testimony to God's goodness. So I think, I think with that idea of that you're weak because of it, I feel like I'd be like quite passionate about standing on that pedestal and like, you're not weak at all, If anything, I think one of the biggest strengths that people have is being vulnerable. Because my heart is, and I truly believe the reality is we all have things that we're struggling with, and sure, some have more intense emotions and like more anxiety and stress and depression than others. But like when they actually like make a step and be vulnerable and talk about it, you invite someone else into where you're at and the most vulnerable parts of you. And that is something that is so strong. Like that shouldn't be considered a weakness. And so I think, these people that kind of see that as like that kind of like, as you touched on, they don't really understand it. So I think my heart is like, I just try to normalize being vulnerable, normalize talking about how you're actually going, because we do fluctuate. That's normal. Like you're going to have weeks where you're like, that's amazing. Or even during the day, you might wake up and feel like I'm so great. And then in the afternoon, you're like, I'm not so great anymore. Yeah. So I think I just try to, talk about where I'm at heaps, like, oh, I'm not feeling that great today, but this is kind of why. And then also, I guess, create a space for other people to do that with me. So I think that kind of, I guess, challenges that idea of weakness, because it's reshaped us in like, it's actually so strong when you are vulnerable and you do invite other people's in, because it shows like your heart and who you are in that kind of thing. Yeah.
And that's it, especially in this space of kind of, anxiety, mental ill health, where you're dealing with so much internalized thoughts and things like that. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability, and it allows people that space to open up and go, oh, okay, yeah.
I'm not the only one.
I'm not the only one. I don't have to keep putting the face on. I can actually say to you, hey, I'm also not doing well this week kind of thing, and that's okay.
Exactly.
And I can feel comfortable to say, actually, I'm struggling, and that's okay. Yeah. And you're not going to go, oh, well, I need to distance myself from you or anything like that. That's part of the experience of being human and sharing that. And getting over this whole, we have to present our best selves at all times, which I think does so much damage to our own mental health, is amazing to be able to be vulnerable and open up. I want to talk a bit about the kind of counselling placement and that kind of stuff you're doing. Obviously, not going into details or anything like that, but you say you're working with young people at the moment. So what kind of age group are you working with?
Yeah, so I'm at a high school.
Okay.
At a high school, but also they've got primary school, but with the primary age students, I don't work one-on-one with them. I just do a bit of group work. So more specifically, I'm probably working with year 7 to year 9. And then, they're kind of my main clients at
Yep.
the moment, which is nice.
Yeah. And is that, because you're in a school setting, is that around school issues or is it kind of generalised?
I'm finding they're very sweet. I'm finding with all of them, they all present with like a different reason, but the underlying thing has got to do with their own worth.
Yeah.
And they
wow.
think that they're not good enough. So then that impacts into like school stress, and that impacts into like friendship issues, or some of them they've got like, like a few struggles like going on in their world, but they're still grappling with like identity and feeling like they can talk about their emotions and feeling like there's worth in what they say. So that's kind of been like the biggest thing. Yet everything that underlines their presentation is like they
Identity.
feel like, they're not good enough.
Yep.
But then that has been really nice for me to like sit in a session with someone, and I said to her, I'm like, oh, all that I hear that you're saying is that you think that you're not good enough. And then as soon as I said that, she kind of was just like, yeah. And it was just like, so special to be able to like label that and then go on that journey with her of trying to help her challenge that belief.
Yeah, that's help her make that realization that actually, that this is what's driving that. I now know what it is, so I can now actually start to try and target it and work with it and things like that. Thinking through, especially, identity, anxiety, that kind of stuff. So kids that are, and this can be your experience as a person who has gone through anxiety, or your experience, in studying counselling and doing placement and stuff like that. But, it'd be good if just some very general but practical kind of stuff about, my mind is racing.
Yeah.
I'm, it may not be a panic attack kind of thing, but I feel that anxiety building within me. How do you short circuit that process and stop it from overwhelming you and becoming something that controls you? Yeah,
for sure. I think the big thing with anxiety and emotions is it's all about habit building, which is hard.
Yep.
So obviously, like in the moment, like if you notice yourself getting like really fixated on a thought, the best thing is to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it takes it out of your head, puts it into a space where there's someone else. And this is like, even if you don't have a safe person to talk about it, like voice memo it to someone or like record it yourself, because the act of actually getting it out of your head is like completely different, and rationalize it. Also is really helpful is to do like grounding exercises. And I feel like this is the kind of thing that's like, just do grounding. But it is really helpful because once again, it like stops the pathways of your brain. So like your simple grounding exercises, like if you're outside or wherever you are, it's like 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can feel and taste, and your 5 senses basically. So that kind of helps to stop the cycle. But in terms of kind of like habits and things to do that kind of help build that network, I think a really big thing is practicing mindfulness and controlled breathing. And I have noticed that benefit because in my classes, my teacher always starts the session by we do like a little bit of a mindfulness exercise. And that's even just like, so first starting to just focus on your breath and what does your breath feel like as it goes in and out of your body, but then kind of focus into what are the noises that you can hear. And it kind of just brings your mind back into the present rather than spiraling ahead like it always does. And I feel like that has helped me because it's like helped me stay present and not, live in fear like I did. Because like, okay, I'm actually in the here and now. And it's okay. And then there's like heaps of research that proves that like if you practice that daily, it actually really helps like manage your stress and anxiety.
It's the whole rewiring thing. You don't necessarily notice that it's working in that instant, but you get to a point and go, oh, hang on.
It's actually
this has made a difference.
It's made a difference, yeah. And I think also a big part of it is learning how you process. So I know that I'm a big verbal processor and it's really helpful for me to journal and talk to people about it, because the reality is you can't always talk to people, or like sometimes you don't need to. So I know that if I'm feeling like I've got something sitting on my mind, I'll like just open up my journal and I'll journal about it. Or you write a letter to someone that you might want to talk to with never actually getting that out to them. So I think it's really helpful to know how it helps you to talk about your emotions, if there's some people that you can talk to about them. And then also, what are some things that you find that makes you feel alive? So that's like, everyone knows like self-care, like I don't know, like have a bath or like go for a walk. But it's more about like, okay, what gives you life and what makes you feel really good. And that's sometimes hard to know, but like it's kind of like the things, and this is what I love, another thing that just brings so much glory to God, and like how we stay well is we do more of what we love. And like he, you know, like it's not like we don't have to go do these hard things. He just wants us to do what we love and what we really enjoy because that makes us feel well.
And what he's wired us for and how he's created us.
Exactly. So for me, like I know I really enjoy, I love going outside because I love like, you know, hearing the sounds of nature and like sitting in that and focusing in that makes me feel better. I also really enjoy having like quality conversations with my friends. So I know that like if I do those things then I'm feeling better. Or like another one of my strengths is like humor.
Yep.
So if I have a day where I don't have a laugh, then I'm not feeling that great. Whereas if I've had a day where I'm like happy and I'm having a laugh, like I'm going to feel better. So I think part of, looking after yourself and building I guess a stronger you or more like emotionally regulated you is like knowing what, the things that you love to do and doing more of them and less of the things that drain you. And that's kind of hard because sometimes the things that drain us, like sometimes it might be work. And so the reality is you're going to have to do that. But then you go home like, okay, I didn't have the best day, but I'm going to make some delicious food because I really enjoy doing that. And that kind of helped build the structures to keep us going in the long term.
Yeah, that's really cool. So then the thread throughout your whole thing is that faith has been such an integral part of your journey. So the kind of similar kind of question is then, how do you continue to go about building those habits kind of thing or integrating your faith into your mental health?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the big things that I know I have to do is journaling. And whenever I journal, it's always about like what I'm feeling, but then what I know God says.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's kind of just the natural trajectory that it goes on because once I get all the emotions down and all the blah down, I'm able to just naturally think rationally. And so I have learned, like sometimes I know that I'm like, I need to come to God, but I'm just like so distracted.
Yep.
And I'm thinking about this and I'm fixated on this and it's not working, so it's a waste of time. So if I like journal and then I come, then I can come to a place where I'm like, oh, hi God, like I can actually talk to you now. So I think I have learned that like in doing that, in processing and being honest with him actually makes me feel better because it's the action of like getting it out of your head and onto paper or talking to like someone else about it and it makes you feel better. And I know, I think it's really helped for me have a bigger understanding of God's heart, you know, how he works through suffering in that he's not the one that like causes it, you know, but he like grows you in it and he makes you stronger. And when you look back of all the different circumstances in my life, even if it's just anxiety or different friendship things that I've faced, like I know that I have come out stronger as a result of it. And even though it really hurts in the time, I would still rather it because I want to be, you know, someone who God wants me to be. I want to be someone that's on a journey that's like of becoming, of like who he wants me to be and to go on that journey. So I think it's like knowing that, okay, I've had times this year where I've had a few months where I haven't felt the best and I felt pretty flat and I don't know why.
Yeah.
But then once I finally come to that realization that like, okay, it's because I was holding belief. I was disenchanted with God. I wasn't happy about what he was doing for me, but I wasn't being honest with him about that. But as soon as I was like, okay, I'm going to say it and I'm going to be honest and I'm going to move on. So I hope that in doing that, each time that, you know, the low periods happen or frustrations come in, it's for shorter times and I'm able to like turn it over quicker rather than sitting in a place of like, we're feeling where God's distant or something like, God, where are you? Even though there's probably something going on, some belief that I'm holding about him that's making me feel distant. So the more that I start to like do that and be kind to myself as well, like, hey, you did take a little while to figure that out, but you got there and hopefully next time it's going to be quicker. And so, I think it's like, just so important for me to build the habits of like going to God to process my emotions rather than going to people first, which is still fine. But I know like I kind of do the both, but I kind of should go to God first because people can't fix what I'm feeling like I need to like process with him because I also know that's a lot more healthy space to be in. You can't only be relying on people.
Other people to process
you can't only be relying on people to fix your problems and carry things because the reality is life's going to be tough. And things are going to come and they're going to be really hard and you can't like spiral out of control every time they happen. And I've got to know, okay, I'm going to have to go to God, sit with that and then use that as my grounding place to go forward. And
So you've obviously had spent a bit of time doing some study at a Bible college.
Yeah.
Did a couple of subjects there. So are there particular parts of the Bible or passages from the Bible that you've learned through that, or just through your life kind of thing, that are a real kind of touchstone for you when you're struggling, that have really helped you through some of those times?
Yeah. So I think the one that I touched on before, which is like the Hebrews 12 verse 1, which talks about fixing your eyes on Jesus and running the race of like perseverance and shaking off the sin that so easily entangles, and running that. And I love that, because that running the race is like, you do want to run a long race, and it's not always like quick, and you want to keep going. And how do you keep going is like by fixing your eyes on Jesus. And I think what changed for me is like, you said, kind of just one of those verses. It's like, cool, fixing your eyes on Jesus, great, moving on. But it's like, no, but what does that actually mean? Like, if I sit in that, what does it mean for me to fix my eyes on Jesus? It means to focus on, who he is, who he has been in my life, like how he's been faithful, how he has, even just the story that God has written, from like the anxiety to the counseling story, like how he's like redeemed that and restored that. Like, I know that he is good and he's working, because if I sit in it and think about all that he's done, you kind of can't not think that. So I think one of my big passions is like using these terms in the Bible and topics that we talk about, and kind of breaking it down to be like, hang on, no, what does God actually say? And because another one is like, cast your anxieties on him. Like, cool, you just recite that, but what does that actually mean, and why does he want us to do that? Because when we give him our anxieties and our fears and let go, it's like the act of surrendering. We actually feel better, not just like, oh, I just got to tell him about this. Like, so it's kind of like breaking down what it actually means and why then it actually gives us life. So that's kind of some of the verses.
Yeah, because it's not about just reciting the verse as a set of magic words that are going to fix your anxiety. It is internalizing that, learning what that actually means,
and sitting on that,
letting the word actually permeate right down into you, and that's when you actually find that this does something, because it's actually changing me and it's helping me to see what I need to do, which ultimately is turning it all over to him.
And I think that's sometimes the problem, because people are just like, oh, have you prayed about it, or have you read this verse? And it's like, cool, like it's not helping, but it's like, have you just sit in, but no, like what this verse actually means is, and there's always like kind of an action that you need to do as a result of it. It's just sometimes we don't know what that action is.
Or sometimes we don't
really want to do that action.
We want to live in the misery for a little bit and feel sorry for ourselves.
Sit and talk to everyone else about it, and then finally come to God and wondering why I'm not feeling better. So I think that's, kind of, it's like once you kind of understand them more, it's like, oh, this is why he wants me to do it.
And just to wrap ourselves up, kind of, is there like an encouragement that you'd want to give to someone that's dealing with this kind of, with anxiety? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing is like, don't let it like be a label and shape who you are, and there's freedom that can come from it. And while it might feel like really hard during the time, like one of the hardest things you ever have, because you're like, crippling, but there is freedom that can come, and there's purpose in the story, and God can use it for strengthening, and you don't know what's going to come. And I believe that like, there, even though it might be something that you're struggling with for a long time, there's still goodness and glory that come as a result of it. And I think, just the biggest thing is like, it doesn't have to be a label. It doesn't have to hold you back. It doesn't have to shape who you are and impact your identity on yourself, because like, it's not who God says you are. I think is one of a big thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Pip, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us. Glad we've got people like you that are becoming counsellors and being out there to help other people. And I appreciate your willingness to just be this is me, this is my life, this is how God has used what I've been through, and now I'm able to serve and fulfill the plans he has for me through that.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful or encouraging, we'd love for you to drop a like on it and share it around. You can see way more content on our website, anxiousfaith.org, where you can listen to each episode of the podcast, find more resources, and read our blog all around mental health and faith. Be sure to also follow us on socials via the links in the description, and subscribe to our channel so you can be kept in the loop when we're dropping more content for you. Thanks so much, and God bless.